It was their gun. It was their safe. It is their responsibility. Members of the jury, throughout today's trial, you've heard about the day of August 18, 2010. And these two 11-year-olds got together and played with a real firearm owned by Andy Park. They went together to the safe, took a combination, pulled the combination out of a file drawer, walked over to the safe, punched in the numbers, and there was a gun. Took the gun out and its bullets, loaded it, and played around with it. Because on August 18, 2010, an accident occurred. As Sidney Park threw the gun to Jesse, Jesse tried to catch it, and it went off in his hands. It was an accident. But whose fault is it? Is it Hayden Duran's fault that what happened in the Parks home on August 18, 2010 occurred? No. And that is why we are here today. The plaintiff in today's case had a burden of proof. They had to prove to you by a preponderance of the evidence that the elements of their claim of negligent parental supervision are true. By this preponderance, or more likely than not. Now, generally, we, the defense, have no burden. But in today's case, we are so confident that Ms. Duran is not liable that we've even brought forth a burden of our own. That even if you're not convinced entirely that Ms. Duran was a good parent to the best of her ability, you must also consider the actions, or lack of actions, of Ms. Andy Park. And this burden of comparative negligence will show to you that Andy Park is negligent for what happened on August 18, 2010. Members of the jury, don't get me wrong. As you heard earlier from Mr. Hodge, you're not countersuing Ms. Park for what happened on August 18. We simply want to make the record clear that Ms. Duran is not liable for what happened. And Ms. Duran, as well as her son, feel very sorry for what happened to Sidney Park. As if it happened, the same thing happened to Jesse Duran, Ms. Duran would feel so sorry for what happened, and same with Ms. Park. However, that does not mean Ms. Duran is liable. And this brings us to the elements of the plaintiff's burden, as well as our burden. And the plaintiff counsel came before you and told you the three elements that are contested. That there was a duty that was breached. That the breach of duty was a direct and proximate cause. And finally, that there was a necessary that Ms. Duran, or Ms. Park in this case, should have had the knowledge of the necessity to prevent this from happening. Now let's break this down. Let's begin with Ms. Duran in the plaintiff's claim. Plaintiff claims Ms. Duran is negligent for what happened on August 18, 2010 because she breached the duty as a parent. However, if you look throughout today's trial, we've seen that, yes, Ms. Duran noticed that there were concerns about her son. Yes, Jesse was interested in the military, interested in guns, and had a friend who was also interested in guns. And yes, the Parks owned a gun. However, does that make Ms. Duran liable for what happened on August 18, 2010? No. Interest in guns, interest in the military, and the knowledge of that interest does not make her liable for a shooting. Ms. Duran, of course, had this knowledge of her son's interest, but she had no knowledge of what would have happened on August 18, 2010. That brings us to the foreseeability that plaintiff came before you and talked to you about. This foreseeability is required in order for them to prove that Hayden Duran is liable. Could Ms. Duran, is it more likely than not that Ms. Duran could have foreseen two children opening a safe with a gun and it going off? No. As Ms. Duran testified today, she had no idea that this gun would be so easy to access. She had no clue. Because Ms. Duran did not own a gun. She did not own a safe. It was the Parks gun. It was the Parks safe. So it's the Parks' responsibility for what happened on August 18th because the safe was breached. This does not make Hayden Duran liable for what happened on August 18th. And Ms. Duran testified before you, as well as Jesse, to clear her name, to show you why she's not liable. And this brings us to the affirmative defense of comparative negligence, which is highlighted by Dr. Ashtarosa's testimony. His testimony based on his checklist that he used in his evaluation of Ms. Park. Now this checklist lists 13 possibilities or necessary steps that must be taken to secure a firearm. This does not apply to Ms. Duran since she did not own a gun or a safe. This applies solely to the responsibility of a gun owner. In this case, Ms. Park. I'd like to make one thing clear. Of these 13, there's only one of these that Dr. Rosa could not make a conclusion on. This one was the storage of the ammunition. You heard Jesse testify that when Sidney and him went to the safe, not only was the gun in the safe, there was a box of bullets. Dr. Rosa told you that should never happen. A responsible gun owner would not store the bullets with the gun. Therefore, the Parks failed in properly storing the ammunition. What this tells us that according to an expert in gun safety and maintenance, Ms. Park and her husband failed in 9 of the 13 necessary steps to secure her gun. Well, what does this tell us? What does this mean? Time for the jury. All of the X's on this checklist are necessary steps to prevent danger with a firearm. This did not apply to Ms. Duran. It wasn't her gun or her safe. This applies to the Parks gun and the Parks safe. And as you heard Dr. DeRosa testify as to that last checklist, the extra precautions, they are necessary. To take extra precautions when any of these are present. That the Parks knew, that Sidney knew where the combination was. And she's gone through the files before. She could have easily recognized a combination as just 3 numbers. She knew that there was a safe in the house. She asked about the safe. Is it likely that Sidney Park knew that these three numbers would apply to this combination safe? That she knew both of these, which she knew about? It's entirely likely, and Ms. Park knew about that. According to the elements of the negligent parental supervision claim, Ms. Park knew, or should have known, that there was a necessity to prevent violence. This is with her knowledge of Sidney and what Sidney knew. That leads us to the breach. According to Dr. Rosa, these extra precautions are necessary, to which Ms. Park failed to do. Ms. Park then failed to meet those circumstances and to prevent danger from her firearm. That is the direct and proximate cause of Sidney's death. Ms. Park not securing her gun to the fullest possible ability was foreseeable. That it is possible that these 2 11-year-olds knew where this gun was and the safe and how to access it. That's foreseeable. Ms. Duran could not have foreseen from what happening on August 18, 2010. She had no idea. In fact, she trusted Ms. Park to secure this gun properly, but she failed to do so. For you cannot find Hayden Duran liable for something that's not her fault. Because it was the Park's safe, the Park's gun. So it's the Park's responsibility.
Time.
Thank you.